Do I have to have a green screen in order to do that same thing, John, behind me?
No, actually, the only thing that helps, see, my chair keeps popping up.
Yeah,
The only thing that really helps is making sure that the background of your chair is very similar to whatever's in the background, and that you wear a shirt, a color that's different than the background.
right.
Well, I guess we can start the meeting. So I now call the May 27th, 2000.
I'm
What?
I'm sorry.
17.
Brianna, if you can hear me, this says a host disabled participant screen sharing. Am I not able to share my screen?
You're sharing it.
Oh, here we go. I got it.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
I now call the Yelm Planning Commission meeting of May 17th, 2021 to order at 4:01 p.m. We could have a roll call of attendees.
Yes, Bob Howard,
Here.
John Thompson,
Here.
Carlos Perez,
Here,
Gary Fugich,
Here,
Ann Warmond. Here. John Graver. I'm sorry, the pictures weren't in front of me. I was going by memory. And I would like to let the commission know that Floyd Sheldon did email. He was not able to attend today. He's hoping he might check in a little late, but he asked to be excused.
okay, thank you. At this time, we will join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
Pledge
Allegiance
to
to
the
the
flag
flag
of the
of the
United States
States of
America,
and to the
and to
republic
the republic for which it
which
stands,
stands
one nation,
Nation,
under God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty
liberty and
justice
justice.
justice
for all.
for all.
Thank you. You all have the agenda before you on your computer screens. I would now entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I would move that we approve the agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, moved by John Thompson and seconded by Bob Howard. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. You all have a copy of the minutes from our April 19th meeting.
Mhm.
Look it over, and if you could make a motion to approve the minutes as printed or as amended.
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes as written.
I'll second it.
Oh, go ahead.
Been moved by John Graver, seconded by Bob Howard. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, minutes have been approved. Public comment or communications. Do we have any, Tammy?
I've received no public comment or communication.
Okay, thank you very much. Tammy, you had the 2021 comprehensive plan update. Would you go over that with us?
I absolutely will. Before we get going, in order for me to share my screen, I've had to minimize the video. So I'm going to ask Casey if she can watch, if somebody has their hand up or something. And do you have the attendee list up if we have any public? Casey's got it all under control. So
Okay.
I'm just going to share my screen and she'll let me know if I'm talking and not catching that you need my attention.
Okay.
So I apologize for those of you who did not receive my email this morning, but I did send out an updated staff report on our comprehensive plan and unified development code updates.
Mhm.
And the email actually did request that that the staff report that I presented at the last meeting, we talked about the requests and some of the questions and impacts and possible impacts that might occur. And then for today, I'm hoping that I will have the Planning Commission's recommendation on how they would like to move forward. Once we have the recommendation, once I have the recommendations from council, then what I will do is put together the actual code changes, strike through and underline for any amendments to the Unified Development Code, and then also put together the rezone staff report and analysis. And we will move forward to the public participation process, presenting these changes to the public, and then we will the Planning Commission will hold their required public hearing. And then after the public hearing, form their formal recommendation to City Council for these updates.
Thank you.
So if there's no questions, if you remember at the last meeting, we talked about the request to allow drive-through establishments in our central business district. We went over what the comprehensive plan, the vision plan and the comp plan have in regards to drive-throughs in the central business district, and that our unified development code actually prohibits any drive-through fast food and services. So we looked at the possible impacts of what drive-throughs, the impacts drive-throughs would have in our central business district, and then looked at the different types of drive-through establishments and looked at the impacts of each. And if you remember, there was quite a huge difference between food establishments such as espresso stands and fast food restaurants, as opposed to a bank and a pharmacy, which has relatively smaller traffic impacts. And then also looking at some of the requirements of the vision plan and the comp plan for the aesthetic value for downtown core. And so with that, the questions to the commission at the last meeting was, should we allow or deny drive-through establishments based on their impact as opposed to their use? And then are there any design standards that would assure the charm and character of the historic central business district? So if you had an opportunity to think about that over this past month and provide a recommendation to me on how you would like to move forward with any possible changes to our code.
How many drive-throughs are in the central business district right now that are grandfathered?
There are 2 drive-throughs in the central business district that are pre-existing non-conforming uses. Timberland Bank on the corner of Yelm Avenue and First Street. And there's, I believe it's Ma and Pa's restaurant, which is right next door to the old City Hall on 510 Yelm Avenue West. Those are the 2 drive-throughs that we have.
Yeah, that used to be a bank a long time ago. Yep. But the one thing about the mom and pa is that it doesn't directly go out onto the, it's not like it goes through and then it comes out somewhere else. It comes off of, the easiest access is to come off the road that's right by the old City Hall, right? So it's not really a double, it's not like an access and an access back on the main street. I mean, there is an alternative there. I'm just bringing up that I'd be a little concerned about the amount of congestion coming. And I know it's not all the time, but man, if people are coming home from work or going to work in the morning and they all of a sudden want a latte, boy, that could get really interesting really fast. Or people are going to work or coming back and saying, that's when I'm going to pick up my prescription, or that's when I'm going to do this or that. So my contention would be, this is just my thoughts, but my contention would be if it's going to be a drive-through scenario, that you can have one road in, but the road out's got to go on to some other side street, or vice versa.
I think that sounds like a good idea, because I'd like to again see that list Tammy, that you said of the different functions that are out there. But if it's the drugstore, if the people exiting from that drive-through or other drive-throughs, whether it's for coffee or fast food and such, exit right onto Yelm Avenue, that's I think going to be difficult. At least I agree with what John said.
I guess I would look at it that you already have drive-throughs outside the business district. If you go on up the road a little bit farther, that's where your drugstore is, your bank is, your service stations and everything else. I think the business district is so short, my feelings would be is you just keep it the way it is and prohibit any new business in that short area having a drive-through. Because it's not that big of an area.
Yeah, I also agree with that. I think the points that John Graver gave, John did, and Ann all sound very logical to me.
Now, we could do something interesting though, is ban drive-throughs from the main street corridor and allow for back streets. In other words, like Trump, I don't know what, there's other streets that go back off of the main street that are still considered commercial area. So if we wanted to broaden our city, instead of just making it, you can only come into downtown, so you can actually walk to streets and back and find something also. We could look at maybe allowing for some drive-throughs back off the main drag.
Yeah, that's
I
what
like
I
that
was.
idea. If you want to attract, if it's, we had this discussion about attracting commercial zoning properties and stuff and combining that with residential. Well, what John said, I think is a good idea. You could bring in commercial, but not right off the main drag, which would just add more to the congestion.
But somebody
Question I have is Tim's Pharmacy. I know at one time they were considering, with the new ownership anyway, about a drive-through. And he's in a tough spot there to where after, what was it, a year ago, we were looking at changing the future of traffic flow through town and the one-ways and the alley. So I kind of agree with everybody else here that the way it is right now, there's probably not a whole lot of room because it could have an impact depending on how our future street flow changes are.
Tammy, would you feel we need to verbalize a motion of what to do, or just enough of what you've heard?
I don't believe we need or even should have a motion at this time.
Okay.
I believe that as you're talking it out, if the planning commission could come to a consensus of how you'd like me to move forward. I'm hearing a couple different options here, either not allowing any drive-throughs, any additional drive-throughs in town or in the central business district, or considering allowing some drive-throughs as long as they have more than one access. If they have access off Yelm Avenue, if they have a second access off another street, so that their ingress and egress is off of two different streets.
I thought I heard a third option, and that third option was not to allow that kind of access within the main district off of the main drag. But if there was some commercial business on the secondary streets, the streets parallel to Yelm Avenue, then that would be allowed within the central business district, the drive-through. Am I mistaken, or did I?
No, I believe
No.
I heard the same thing, Carlos.
Yeah,
Yes.
I did too.
Thank you for
There were three
clarifying that. I believe the one something that would need to be considered is existing establishments such as Tim's Pharmacy. If a drive-through could be allowed there, they do have access off of Yelm Avenue and a secondary side street. But,
Yes.
you know, I don't know about prohibiting existing driveways. The option of not allowing new driveways if they have side entrances. But I would just
But
want to make sure that we don't create a code that we can't enforce for, existing businesses because they would already be non-conforming.
If in case, say like in the case of Tim's Pharmacy, if you had the exit from the drive-through, exit back toward City Park, then I think that you're basically conforming with the request that they're using the side street for their drive-through, not the Yelm Avenue. Because the actual entrance to their parking lot and the exit from their parking lot, I think you can't tell whether somebody may have gone through the drive-through and then parked and then gone out through the exit to get to, but you can make sure that if somebody really is driving through, that the exit, the line of traffic that they're supposed to be in would go out toward City Park.
So basically you would come down, was it First Street off 507?
Yep.
Turn in there. So then we're not actually entering or exiting on Yelm Highway, Yelm Avenue.
Mhm.
So that would be our recommendation. Is that what the consensus is, our recommendation for Tim's?
Well, basically, I think you can't do it for Tim's per se. You'd have to have a standardized recommendation for the entire central area. Otherwise, we would be bogged down in the mud so deep we wouldn't be able to get out of it. My recommendation would be that you can enter off of Yelm Avenue, but you must exit off of another avenue or exit, because the biggest traffic congestion is cars trying to get back onto the arterial.
Yeah, well, basically that's what, we were saying. So you take the word Tim's out and you say they can enter from the main thoroughfare, but have to exit to a side street.
Well, Tim wouldn't have that problem anyway, because they'd be, the only way they could enter would be either First Street, or the one that runs right next to the dental
Yeah,
place.
they have no entrance on 507.
No, they have not.
Yeah, but we were just saying the main roads on the central business district. Which does that include where the Jay-Z Knights place was and all those, Tammy? On the central business district?
Yes, it goes from Yelm Avenue
Okay.
West at Solberg all the way down to 4th Street, so past Gordon's and La Gitanas.
So that would be, therefore, you have to include the side streets or the street of 507 on by the park there.
That's
So-
510. Or well,
Right,
507, but 510
Yeah.
also is included all the way past to the middle school, right?
Yeah,
510
So-
portion. Is that
yeah,
correct?
so those are all roads off the central district, so they could enter off from those main thoroughfares, but they must exit onto a side street.
So is that what I'm hearing? There was 3 options. One was to make sure that they had 2 different accesses or accesses with 2 streets. The second was to prohibit them altogether in the central business district, or not. The third was not to allow any access off of the main highways 507 and 510. But listening now, there seems to be a consensus to allow drive-through establishments in the central business district as long as they, the drive-through exits the site onto a side street and not onto Yelm Avenue or First Street. Or, yeah, Yelm Avenue or First. would be
I
the
believe
two.
that's what we were saying, yeah.
Okay,
Okay. Thank you.
all right. Moving on. Thank you very much. So moving on, we have the allowance to increase density in our commercial zones. We talked about the fact that we do have mixed use development is allowed in our C1 zone, and that the residential component of a mixed use development needs to be residential encompasses no more than 60% of the commercial establishment, or pardon me, the overall establishment. We find that in our downtown core, trying to reach that 60% becomes a little bit difficult. And then also trying to get some high density urban housing located in the downtown core next to and close to these urban facilities. So there was a request to allow, or to, pardon me, a request for an increase of density for apartments in the commercial zones to be more than 16 units per acre. For the existing infrastructure, I'm gonna do a quick side note. The general overall look and assumption is that our water and sewer and streets, everything are adequate to handle the change. The sewer analysis for the increase in density and what it means to our sewer system and the basins and the pressurized system is being reviewed. I should have that answer back this week, and that will just, we're expecting that that's going to confirm our assumption that the sewer sizes and our sewer system plan is planning ahead adequately, and that the increase in density will not negatively affect it. But that final analysis will come and show whether that is supported or not. So the question of, is existing infrastructure in place to handle the increased density in our commercial zones? Will it really decrease the amount of commercial land available for future development? And then is there really a gain or loss in tax revenue for residential versus commercial? I believe the gain or loss in tax revenue, I'll go over that a little bit when we talk about the rezones. But the real difference is not so much in sales tax and retail sales, B&O tax, but more in the actual annual real estate taxes that the city receives, which, depending on sizes and types of units, could either be close to a wash, or residential sometimes can actually produce more.
Have any comments to share with Tammy on that?
What was the percentage residential to commercial in the mixed?
Right now, the mixed-use development requires that no more than 60% of the development be residential. So that you could look at that as acreage. But if you were going to look at maybe a commercial building that has retail on the bottom and commercial on the top, you know, if you had a 2-story building and you had, retail. If you had residential on the top and retail on the bottom, and you had an equal sized building, that would be 50-50, residential on the top and retail on the bottom. But if you increase that density, you could look at doing 3 stories and having 2 stories of residential on the top and retail on the bottom.
I like that a lot.
I like,
I do
I've
too.
seen it work. I've seen it in Olympia and other places.
So it's really square footage that the 60/40 is based on?
It could be looked at both ways, square footage or acreage.
Any other opinion? It seems that we like that idea. John Thompson, do you have any comments?
No, I don't think so. You know, one of the things, you know, particularly depending on where a commercial piece is located, those questions might be addressed anytime someone gave a proposal of a joint process. You might have that just included in there, that when someone submits a recommendation for changing that, those questions have to be answered by the planners before you could proceed. Would that make sense, or?
Not really, John. We really
Okay,
need to
just-
have it written in the code.
You have to have it written in it. All right. I was
Mhm.
just looking at an option that might work. Sorry.
We turned down one
basically-
person and we have lawsuits.
Yeah, I know. Okay, all right. Well, that makes it more entertaining then. Right?
John
If you
Graver, do you
did-
have anything?
No, as Tammy mentioned, I like the 2 up, 1 down. I went to a place in California that had blocks and blocks of it, and it was fantastic. I mean, it was just so nice. It had little mom and pop stores. It had, one place took over a bunch of them at the bottom, and it was a little market type of thing. Beauty parlors, and most of those people lived upstairs. It was really a neat thing, and it really looked good. So I like that a lot.
Ann?
I agree with John Graver, that I'd like to see if we could do it to say had a target of 70% or less, somewhere in that range, so we get the 2 up and 1 down for commercial. But we'd also, those 2 floors that are up on the R16, if that's what's allowed, maybe we need to have it higher density than that. And not just consider it's 1 dwelling or 2 dwellings for each of the commercial.
Tammy, would that be, we should be put like 32 or something like that?
Well, that's what the request was, to increase the allowed density. So to increase it from 16 units per acre, I think that 32 units was was verbalized to us when we were spoken to and requested to bring this forward. That doubles the amount of density. I would caution that we think about the fact that not all development is going to be retail on the bottom and commercial on the top. We do have a retail establishment in town that has the apartment complex with a commercial component. And that was over on Creek Street. And at this point, only 1 commercial building has been constructed. And the 216 apartments were completed before the rest of the commercial infrastructure was done. So now we have a huge apartment complex in the commercial core, and with very little of the, we have the apartments in the mixed use development, but we have very little of the commercial component that has been completed. So if somebody chose to do the development in that way with retail in the front and maybe apartments in the back, then is going to be a huge difference in how it's laid out and how it fits on the property. So I don't know that the density really is the issue. I think increasing the density, as you said, would be is a good thing. I just want to make sure that our design standards are such that we don't lose all of our commercial land to apartments.
When you do that, how do you calculate parking in those concepts where, you have a resident or a business, say 3 businesses on the ground floor, and you have 32 apartments up above? And I don't know what is it, 1.5 car spaces per apartment or something you calculate when you're developing parking? And then would you have to set aside specific parking for the business? And is that something that they would have to develop and approve by the city, the parking area?
Yes, minimum parking requirements. It would have to allow or provide enough parking for all the uses on the site. You may remember that in your last update to the Unified Development Code, we actually did reduce some of our parking minimum parking requirements for apartments based on the number of units. And also if it is fronting on a street that has on-street parking or next to a bus route, there was also a reduction. So
Right.
we did reduce it down some. But it would be for the overall development.
Carlos, do you have any comments?
Yeah, just a question, I guess. Given that we, that we would increase this percentage, what oversight is in place to restrict or limit the continued growth if we don't get water rights, if we don't get transportation funding? Is it the responsibility of the planners to just say, we can't do this right now? Or is it up to the developers to say, I don't think I can do this because it's not worth my while? Who's going to stop that growth if we don't have the infrastructure to, or even, the infrastructure to accommodate that growth?
So Carlos, part of reviewing and approving land use applications is the concurrency determination that we make that we have adequate facilities to serve the
Okay.
development at the time of impact. So if we do not have adequate water, if for some strange reason our water rights were not approved and we didn't have adequate water to serve, we could not approve the project. Then also for transportation infrastructure, we have two ways. Through that same concurrency review, we need to make sure that the adequate transportation facilities are in place when the impact occurs. And that would take into account any improvements that the developer might be required to make on frontage improvements as well as offsite. We could take into account any city projects that we have planned and funded, or, oh no, I already said that, or that development may be required to do offsite improvements, and they may be required to update an intersection or build a roundabout or something based on their impact.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
So
I agree.
I'd like to, is that the contention then to allow for this increase and maybe increase the density as the city sees fit? To say possibly 32?
Excuse me, Tammy, you said that the area over there behind Safeway, that they did not complete the commercial, correct?
That's not, no, it's on Creek Street.
Oh, Creek Street, I'm sorry, Creek Street, but they still haven't completed the commercial, right?
Right, that development included, they did complete the frontage on Creek Street with parking and 2 building pads. And then the rest of the commercial component was facing 507, where Christensen's Furniture and the liquor store is. And then there's vacant land there that was taken into account for that 60-40 split. That's vacant land that has not been constructed.
Do we have some sort of fines for not completing projects?
That development went through a binding site plan, and we did require that a certain amount of the required commercial be completed before they built out their full apartment complex or the residential portion of that development. And then knowing that the commercial component would be based on, future commercial growth. So at this point in that type of review, there's not a fine for them to not complete the commercial component.
I was just wondering, maybe there's some way that we can say, or do something that again, we seem to enjoy the 3-story, 2 up, 1 down, some way to make it more advantageous to them to say, wow, it's a better thing for us to do is to build it this way than having a separate building or separate buildings for residential and a separate building for commercial.
Right.
So maybe we need to put a comment is it's all within one structure? Is that what you're saying? Like the two up, one down?
Yeah,
And is that, Tammy, possible to put that verbiage into the plan?
Yes, what I'll do is I'll try to craft some wording to reflect the two options that we talked about. Increasing the density to 32 units, requiring that the commercial component be completed with the actual building, and then look at maybe some other options on how to make sure that commercial component is completed before the final project is complete.
Okay.
yeah, maybe we could make it so that if you're gonna separate the buildings out, the commercial has to be built first. If you want to do the two up, one down, you can build them all at the same time as you go along, you know.
You can't rent till you base the main floor.
Yeah, there you go.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm gonna keep us moving on because we have a lot of information. I'm gonna
Okay.
do my best to reflect what you're saying in actual code wording and documents for the next meeting. But for now, I would like to, if it's okay, push on through this.
Yeah, I think that's proper.
Okay.
Okay, chain link fencing. Right now, chain link fencing is prohibited when it's visible from a street. And so we looked at what the old standard is for chain link fencing and some different options for other types of fencing when it's visible from a public street. And then we talked about at the last meeting how we can we still use high quality building materials, or should we still use them? And are there adequate options for commercial developments to have safety from theft and vandalism by using other materials? Or should we relax our standards on chain link fencing?
It seems a mystery. If you build a new bus transportation area for the school district and you're not going to put up chain link fencing, what would you put up?
Right.
Same thing if you were doing an industrial, like, where you have contractor material and stuff. I'm trying to think how that would work in a commercial area without chain link fencing.
John, there's a couple of times when the state overrides us for
Okay,
chain link fencing. That is essential public facilities, and that's from the Homeland Security. Schools have some special consideration for fencing. And then any impound facilities, such as Bill's Towing or Yelm Auto Recycle, they have impounded vehicles, and the state actually does require chain link fencing.
but I guess
Those override our design standards.
then I would ask the question, it kind of becomes a hypocrisy then, because I have a chain link fence on this house, and next door I have to have a wooden fence, and then the other house has a chain link because it falls under state. It seems to me like maybe chain link fencing can be visible from the road, but you have to have a setback or something. But I'm not sure how we would address this. Every other site could have different fencing this way. Maybe I'm reading it wrong, but.
Well, you know what's kind of interesting? It said, remember the division came out and said, and I don't remember this part at all, but it said, for the beautification of Yelm. And, of course, you say the state comes along and says, gee whiz, they want chain link fencing on these auto body wrecking yards. I'm thinking, well, there's a real indication that that's not a beautification fencing, and then if you have people that are, have fences around the yard, they're 6-foot fences, I don't know how beautiful that is either. So I don't remember voting in the vision for no chain link, but I'm glad, I'd be happy to change my mind.
Well, this would only apply to commercial and industrial developments. This doesn't apply to single family homes.
Oh, okay. I thought it was from the core.
No. Well, question would be, what about the chain link fencing where they put the strapping in it? So the color, they block the fencing by by running stripes of something through it or something, you know, it has to be color coordinated or something. There's an option there too for commercial. So you can't see through the fencing. I'm thinking of the bus transportation area right now, you know, next to the school district, that's chain link fence. And you can see all the, everything going on inside, or Bill's Towing. If that fence was chain link but blocked, so you didn't have to look into it, might be a requirement.
Or require landscaping in front of it.
That's possible too, yeah.
I mean, these
That
guys,
looks like
go ahead.
what we've
Ann.
done in one of those pictures, the picture of the RV storage area has landscaping in front of the fence.
Yeah, it looks good.
Yeah, I like that.
They also, this picture also has a wire fencing. It's not chain link.
Can't really tell.
Yeah, there's also a black chain link fencing that doesn't jump out as well too.
Vinyl
Yeah.
coated.
Yeah, vinyl coating
Yeah.
also is less obtrusive along the road.
Mhm.
And yet with the cost of all materials seem to be just skyrocketing these days. I don't know how many developers are going to be real happy about trying to do something that's more expensive than the basic option of the chain link.
Well, if you're talking beautification, chain link is not it.
Yeah.
I agree.
But you know, the landscaping in front of it, now that would be okay, I think. That would
Yeah.
work.
Yeah,
So
I
the
like-
I will say the landscaping in front of this RV is augmented to provide a more visual barrier to the fence than our standard 8-foot landscape perimeter. So if you were thinking of using landscaping for screening, you might want to consider what that, how that screening should, how dense that screening should be. Because if you think about driving down the road and you look at, I don't know, Napa in Walt's Tire, I forget, whatever his new business name is. And then the complex at the corner of Creek Street and Yelm Avenue that has AutoZone and so forth.
Mhm.
That perimeter landscaping is not a visual barrier. But it meets the intent of our perimeter landscape requirements. So if allowing chain link fencing, it would have to, if you're looking at the landscaping to be a visual barrier so you don't see it, then that landscape would need to be, we'd need to look at the landscape code to increase that. The other item that occurs is when that is required, then those businesses that want people to see them from the road, well, they want the chain link fence, they can have the safety and people can still see what's there. It's kind of a win-lose situation.
Well, if there's the alternative of the wire fence, like is at the RV storage, I think there is a solution for businesses that need security. And there's commercial businesses that need security and they're not necessarily required, like the compound of cars being compounded or the car recycle and the other places that you have to have chain link because of state rules.
I like the landscaping concept just to screen the chain linking, and that does one way to make it look nicer. And a lot of those places that need a 6-foot high screen cyclone fence, I don't think they really you know, need to be seen by the road.
I agree. I still like that idea of the landscaping. If they want, put chain link fence, or if they have to because of state law, or whatever. And we want to maintain beautification. That's the only way to do it, is to have them cover the fence with some landscaping.
Well, it also might be the size of the property. If you have a 40-acre piece of property and 300 feet from the road, they have a chain link fence, do you need to do it there versus the chain link fence along the side of the road? I think we're only talking about fence near the road. Is that what you're
Yes.
thinking of?
Yes,
Yeah. So if it's back behind the property or off the road a significant distance, I'm not sure that's an issue.
Yeah, no, it's the ones right alongside the road.
yes, that's what yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
John, Graver, I have not heard your comments.
Oh, I'm for it. I'm one of these people, I'm for the landscaping and and you're all right about, if it's back off, the street, then of course the question comes for Tammy, how far? So, but yeah, but I think, all the things that we're coming up with are really good.
So am I hearing that chain link fencing would be allowed when it's screened with a dense landscape barrier? Or if they do not request or do not want to do the dense landscaping to prevent visibility, then they need to provide other types of fencing.
Okay, I got one other question. Now, what happens if the chain link fence is mandatory because it is an impound lot or it's something else? And they're gonna say, well, we're not gonna spend all the money to landscape this because we don't have to. So do you run into a problem where you're going to make that a requirement no matter what chain link fencing? I would assume we'd have to do it for everybody, is that correct? Even if it was allowed by the state? Because they would say that's an additional expense that we don't want to expend,
Mhm. They would.
or we don't
Yeah.
have to expend, maybe.
I don't, I'm not sure. I think if we make it mandatory on any chain link fencing, and we don't specify, anything other than it has to be, if there is chain link fencing, there has to be a density, landscaping, I guess, across the front. I'm not assuming they have to go all over the place with it, but
Adjacent to a main road, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Adjacent to a road, you require the landscaping. I think that's what we're looking at.
Right. Yeah. I like that idea personally, and I think it
So
sounds like consensus.
I think I've got it. If chain link fencing is going to be used, anything that's adjacent to the street must have a dense landscape screen to prevent visibility of the fence, or use alternate fencing in that area. And then when it's not visible or not on the street frontage, that they can look at chain link fencing on the rest of that. The last thing I will say is there's times when those chain link fences are required, such as the school district and the school, for children's safety. They could not have the dense barrier, a dense visual barrier, because that provided places for people to hide and not be seen.
That's
And where the
correct.
children and the grounds had to be visible. So the dense landscape barrier didn't work for them. However, the standard landscape perimeter did.
Yes. Yeah, for the safety of the students, that's a safety program.
So we could have an extra statement in there. Well, we don't even need it. If the
No.
state requires something different, we need to follow the state regulation. And if the school
Mhm.
needs visibility, that's fine. Auto impound facilities, their fences have to be 8 feet tall. So there's specific standards that are outside of our control that wouldn't fall under these regulations.
And you could just have that worded in your regulation, you know, if you want chain link fencing and it's outside of the mandatory regulations of the state, these are the requirements. You have to have the dense barrier.
Well,
Okay.
couldn't we still require them to have a dense barrier even though it's required by the state? I mean, it's just,
Not on school district property.
oh,
but
no,
law
not, no,
enforcement
no,
will allow
unless, you know, unless safety dictates. you
Yeah,
know,
well, that's
yeah,
what we're saying, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think the reason for the junkyard things is probably because they usually have, you know, dobies or rotties running around at night. If somebody jump over a wood fence, man, they get eaten.
Go through the wooden fence.
Yeah.
Hey, guys, we're halfway through.
Oh,
And
whoa.
Golly, we're only an hour into this. We're good. Let's do it.
Okay. So the design standards for RV and mini storage. So it should really state RV, boat, and mini storage. Right now, our code is that RV, mini storage, and boat storage are allowed in our C2 and C3 zones, which are down around Creek Road and out 507 on both the north and south side of 507 towards Walmart. There is a small section of C2 zoning on Yelm Avenue West on the other, heading west on Yelm Avenue on the other side of the school. The caveat to all of this is that RV and mini storage needs to be located more than 500 feet from an urban arterial. That includes Yelm Avenue East, Yelm Avenue West, First Street, both Yelm City Park side and going out towards the industrial zones. Tahoma Boulevard is an urban arterial. And Killian Road, Bald Hill Road, Canal Road, Grove Road, and Coates Roads are all considered urban arterials. If we were to look at allowing the RV mini storage, especially if we were looking at reducing the setback from the road, is mini storages along the highway and along our main entrances into town. Does that meet the aesthetic desires of the city? Does it, would it be a negative impact to pick up our prime commercial land on the highway with RV and mini storage? Or do we want to keep it set back off the road? And if we do keep it set back, is 500 feet far enough? Is it too far?
That's almost one of these, it looks good. Why change it? I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure I'm an expert whether should it be 550 or 492 feet or whatever. I mean, we've had that standard now. Is there anybody begging to change it, you know, wanting to put something in? I don't know how everybody else feels, but I'm not smart enough to figure out whether it's good at 500 or not.
I think it should be 600, 100 yards.
Yeah.
That's what I mean, make it 100 yards.
I think 501 should be, Carlos.
if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Well,
Yeah, I agree. Let's leave that one alone. Move on to the next one. That's
But the arterials, the ones that like Canal and Grove, that's going to change when the new loop is in. So do we address that now before the loop is there and start to say that Canal and Grove really will not be as much of an arterial road once the loop is in place?
It doesn't say arterial, it says main street. It would still be a main street for development and houses. There's houses there and everything else. I don't think, we aren't saying arterials, are we? We're saying main streets.
Well, it's just that's the wording that's in the document.
Yeah. Oh, I thought it said main streets.
No, it's arterial, but
Oh, okay.
Well, and I think you bring up an excellent point. Should the transportation system plan look at street classifications? I believe we would need to, in order to change our street classifications, it would be part of our transportation system plan update. And that would be the appropriate time to look at what changing the classification would mean. And that's going to be based on, the street classifications are really based on the number of trips, vehicle trips that are on that road. So our collector's street standards have a higher traffic generator than our local access residential streets that are within subdivisions. They're built to different standards because they have more vehicle trips per day. And so the transportation system plan, all these years back, has always looked at Killian Road, Bald Hill, Canal Grove, and Coates to be one of our heavier traffic, capacity streets. So with the loop and with all the improvements we've done now, should those still remain? And there's areas of Canal Road, Grove Road, and Coates Road that may or may not need to be classified that way. So I think that if you did want to consider looking at allowing or changing the street standards, then we can do that through the transportation system plan. And at this point, I'm hearing we don't want to change our design standards that it be 500 feet from an urban arterial.
Yeah, we need more hard data, and when that hard data comes through, then we can address these issues as to whether or not they should still be considered arterial or whatever.
Right, and that would be through the transportation system plan
Yes.
update.
Yes.
Okay. Now on to new information. We had a request. We did not talk about this at the last meeting because I didn't get it, some of the analysis done in time. So this is new information to you. We did have a request for, we had a request to provide fee waivers for nonprofit housing. And that would include, there's all kinds of fees that are required at the time of construction of housing. And that includes permitting fees, planning land use application fees, public hearing fees. That would include building permit fees. That includes our water and sewer system development charges. It includes traffic impact fees. It also includes impact fees that we collect, but they're not under our control, and those are school impact fees and fire impact fees. So if we were to look at providing an option for fee waivers, then we would need to look at what the impact would be to revenue, really determine whether these fees are a deterrent for the construction of affordable housing. My concern
to Jerry Fuji, because he did all this in Olympia with the Habitat for Humanity. Did Olympia waive the building fees when you were building houses in Olympia? Do you remember?
We fought it to try and get it done. Right about that time I left, Lacey wavered them. And Olympia started to do some wavering on fees also. Basically, what we were able to show was the property tax that these Habitat houses were generating for the city. That was an advantage that they had. Before there was land that was not being used, and all of a sudden now they had revenue.
So then maybe what you'd say is maybe construction of nonprofit housing, such as Habitat, you could waive fees, but that wouldn't waive the taxes on that property once people moved into it. Is that what, maybe you'd look at it that way?
Yes.
Okay.
So John, to follow up on that, you and Jerry both, the city of Lacey does have fee waivers for affordable housing or for nonprofit housing, and they list out the specific Habitat for Humanity or Thurston County Housing Authority.
Okay.
They list out some very specifics for that. Our fee schedule is not part of the Unified Development Code. So this review and update wouldn't include the fee, changing any fee schedule. I think that also when we're looking at waiving fees for affordable housing, it brings up more questions. And if I can impose to go a little bit further, some of those questions are, what really defines affordable housing? Who would qualify? Are these fees really the deterrent? Building and planning fees can be reduced or waived by council. However, impact fees have different processes that are regulated
Right.
by the RCW, which many times or most times is that any impact fees that a city waives must be repaid from public funds other than impact fee accounts. So we're going to have to come up with those funds out of some other account.
Well, see, I would also look at nonprofit housing, maybe a different thing. I don't look at low-cost housing as nonprofit housing. What I would look at nonprofit housing is building the minister's home next to a church, or building a housing for unwed mothers, temporary housing or something like that as nonprofit. I'm not sure that low-income housing is nonprofit, because somebody's still drawing money off of that, and the state may be offsetting it. So I think you have to do the definition of what is nonprofit housing, and I don't think it's the same as low-income housing.
Yeah. Habitat is nonprofit.
Right, I understand that.
And and maybe that's the term we should use instead of affordable nonprofit, but the nonprofit would enter into there, and therefore might make it a little easier for the city to do it. And then I know all the like Habitat that are looking for places.
Then I would ask a question. If a church decides to build in the city of Yelm, do you charge them fees?
Yes.
But they're nonprofit. So how would you argue in the court of law? Well, you're allowing nonprofit housing, but now we're building a religious building, a church worship place. Why do we have to pay fees? Because we're nonprofit. So would we have to maybe look at this a little deeper and get some thoughts rather than make any decision right now, I would think? Or
Well, John, we have an option in our fee schedule for nonprofits to waive fees already.
okay,
So I think where we need to go with this is, it would be my suggestion to you to respond back to the city council that planning commission is in favor of looking at fee waivers for nonprofit housing. That should be reviewed through the fee schedule and forwarded to city council, and this detail of who should apply, or who would qualify and what fees would be waived or reduced, I think should be reviewed by our finance committee and then referred to council, along with the planning commission's recommendation to determine what those impacts are.
that makes sense.
I do. I agree. Any other comment from Ann?
I like your suggestion of removing the word affordable from that
And put in
definition.
nonprofit housing?
Yes, just keep it nonprofit, because you're talking two words that have a little different meanings.
Yes.
Absolutely.
The other thing too is that we're talking, the words say fees, but as it says in there, there are some impact quote fees that really aren't our fees. Those are impact charges, for anyone who builds anything. And so somebody's going to have to pay them. So if we waive them, we're paying them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the taxpayers pay.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as waiving their fees. And if there's, and if there's someone who's going to be doing a, what do you call it, transportation study, that's not us. It means somebody else has got to be paid.
What I noticed when I first went down to Olympia, the cost for the permit and all those things associated with that were greater than the cost of constructing the house. They were that high.
Wow.
They're over $20,000 to do a little habitat house. And then when they came down to it afterwards, because of the quality of what those houses were, all the people around there's property tax went up. In addition, they got the property tax for the houses we put in. So they had a financial windfall.
Much to the chagrin of the neighbors.
Well, they liked it because all of a sudden they had nice houses instead of a bunch of rundown looking dumps with homeless people living there, so. So Tammy, does that answer your question?
Yes,
Okay. So that's our consensus?
Yeah,
Okay. Okay, moving on.
thank you. Moving on, review our regulations in regards to tiny homes or alternate housing. This one has taken a lot of effort in with us today. I hope he's still with us, is Chris Vaccaro, our building official. He's provided a memo that I have at the end of our staff report that talks about building code amendments that have come from the state in regards to tiny homes. And then also there's a lot of news in the paper and there's a lot of information you're seeing about the tiny homes, and micro housing is the most recent one we've seen. And I want to just make sure when we're looking at our tiny homes or alternate housing that we're very clear on one thing. First of all, the International Residential Code describes or defines a tiny home as a dwelling under 400 square feet. Could be mounted on wheels or may even be a traditional RV. They're considered temporary or recreational use and not a dwelling unit, as it doesn't meet the IRC. To meet the residential code, the housing would be required to meet all the standards for a dwelling, which has room sizes, ingress, egress, so forth. Needs to meet the mechanical code, and it needs to meet the energy code in things such as insulation, for example, between the ceiling, floor, and so forth. Tiny houses on trailers are permitted by the state as RVs. Permanent occupancy is not required or allowed there either. Other housing concepts you've seen, maybe seen in the news, co-housing or veteran villages down in Ording. They create dwelling units that meet the International Residential Code, but because they're part of other community features, temporary housing is considered emergency housing and not intended for permanent living. That's what you're seeing a lot of housing that's coming up right now. There are temporary emergency housing for the homeless, gives them somewhere to be out of the weather. They're not intended for permanent dwelling units. Our code right now does not prohibit tiny homes, as we don't have a minimum lot or housing size, with one small exception that if you do a manufactured home community, the manufactured home must be at least 24 by 36. Our planned residential development overlay provides flexibility in development standards, so you can change your street standard, site layout. You can change all standards that are required in a subdivision, with the exception of the actual state requirements for recording a map, but it allows density increases and it allows flexibility in our zoning. So tiny homes, if constructed to the residential code, would be allowed. And with Appendix Q that's proposed or that's been adopted by the state, if we adopt it, Appendix Q allows for flexibility for ingress and egress, such as a tiny home may only have one exit, but it might have a sleeping loft. So if they had an emergency exit on the roof, they could count that as their extra ingress and egress. And there's some other standards for stairs, and I can't remember all of them right now. But what it does not do is it does not remove the requirement that the dwelling meet the international or the residential building code. So the impacts of this is, while we could allow it, the residential code makes it difficult for most tiny homes to meet the IRC. And the cities that have allowed the tiny homes are temporary housing. They're either for homeless as emergency housing, or I do know that in Yakima, they have allowed these small houses for transient workers. So during the picking season in Eastern Washington, the workers there are allowed to stay in the tiny homes, but they don't live there year round. So the question here isn't so much, do we allow tiny homes? Because we could. Does our Unified Development Code currently provide adequate provisions for our varied housing? And then the next thing comes into some of the other types of co-housing or these small villages. I think, and I feel strongly that at this point, I do not have, and I don't believe the Planning Commission has, now I've lost my turn. I was so excited. I had it all ready to say. I don't think we have the capacity. There's my word. We don't have the capacity to do the research that's needed to show whether we need to add these other types of alternative housing. I believe that we all know that there is a strong need for affordable housing, and whether that be nonprofit housing, affordable housing, or varied housing, whatever you want to, however you want to define it, we all know that there's a huge need. The huge need we found out 2 years ago when we looked at this was we have a lot of subsidized housing already in Yelm. Our apartment mix is, I believe it was more than a 50-50 split between subsidized housing and apartments. So we already know that we have some of that, but and the missing middle, as everybody calls it, is that affordable housing that's not low income or subsidized, but somewhere in between the actual market value of housing right now. So my question to you is, we know we need affordable housing. Tiny homes, we have the provision for. I believe that the preventing the tiny homes is not a city regulation. It's more making sure the housing meets the International Residential Code. And then.
We're out of here. You get it all.
Okay, bye. Sorry about that. And then what is our true need for this affordable housing? And in order to determine that and actions that we can take, I believe that it's coming to a point that we need to look at a housing action plan, because a housing action plan is going to do a needs analysis to quantify existing and projected housing needs. It develops the strategies to increase the supply of housing, analyzes your population and employment trends with documentation of projections. It considers strategies to minimize the displacement of low-income residents. And it allows us to meet the housing element that's needed that's required by the Growth Management Act. And really when it comes down to it, quantifying the need, developing the strategies, and doing the analysis of the population projections and needs, that is something that I don't have the capacity for at this time. I believe that we need the strong data to support any actions that we might choose. The rest of the staff report that I sent to you today just gives some information about affordable housing and doing a housing action plan. It talks about the housing that I spoke about in the city of Olympia with their emergency housing and how they permitted Quixote Village. And then also, here's Chris's staff report.
Poor Chris. Hanging
Poor
in
Chris
there
sat through this
an hour
whole
and 15
meeting.
minutes.
Now we can read that and have the answer, right?
So I have Chris here in case you had questions about the difference of tiny home and building. But when it really comes down to it, I think that we already know and have established that we need more affordable housing in town. I don't believe that our zoning code is the barrier to tiny homes. The building code, if we adopt this, is just allows some specifics such as stairs, handrails, headroom, ladders, heights, and also, but does not remove the IRC code for the standard housing and meeting a dwelling unit. So as I stumbled through this and on this, there's a lot of information here, but I don't believe that I can provide you the analysis you're going to need to determine how much housing we have, how much we need, and what other strategies we can do to achieve the affordable housing. I don't believe we can do that without going through an actual housing action plan.
How is that done? How is an action plan done and who does it? Is there a consulting group that does it?
So recently, with the Growth Management Act, wanting folks to update and make sure their housing element meets the Growth Management Act, Department of Commerce had some funds available to do housing action plans. And the cities of Olympia, Lacey, and Tumwater all received funding from Department of Commerce to do their housing action plan. Because they all border one another, they agreed to work with Thurston Regional Planning Council and shared those grant funding with Thurston Regional, and Thurston Regional is doing the housing needs assessments, a rental survey, and providing a list of specific actions the cities can take to increase their affordable housing stock. So I just kind of read what they did. But I asked, there was a population minimum that had to be met to receive this funding. And we did not meet the minimum population to be able to receive this housing funding. So yes, the housing needs assessment, rental surveys, and proposed actions are definitely done through some type of consulting services, whether it's Thurston Regional Planning or if you hire a consulting firm.
Well, can I say one thing about, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, but those tiny homes and all the tiny homes I've been familiar with, per square foot costs more than building a house. They just, you know, I'm seeing this more like a fad as far as tiny homes go, you know, or maybe not just a fad, but a, you know, a popular item. And if you're talking about density, unless you can stack those things, they're going to be, and if they want to be on land that's contiguous to the city or within the city, aren't we looking for, like, you know, density? So I don't know how that, you know, sure, tiny home costs more, but I guess it costs a lot less than a regular big home, you know, but it's still much more than, you know, again, per square foot. And then, you know, unless you got them next, you know, just about one on top of the other, I don't know how we get the density.
There was an article earlier this week, I think, that was about having condominiums as that mid-range that of dwellings, the ones that are not the subsidized housing, but they are the starter home level for people who can't afford the bigger starter homes that are out there, the ones that are for you know, 2 to 3 bedrooms already. Do we have in our code someplace that talks about condominium approach, which is not an apartment? It's actually owned by an individual or a family?
Yes, that's achieved through the binding site plan, where the property is owned by the condominium association. All of the common areas such as open space, landscaping, parking, stormwater, all maintained by the association, but each unit is owned individually. So the city you would go through the binding site plan process to achieve that. The condominiumizing the building is a state process. So yes, we have the availability and we have a small set of condominiums in town.
I think it's a better alternative than the tiny houses.
Yeah, I'm
You
with
need-
Ann. I mean, you could have an apartment building, could be the same thing. It could be the same thing except to be a condominium. you know?
Right. It's
You
how
know,
it's
Yeah.
structured, sale or rent.
And you could even do townhouses if you don't mind, a little lower density.
Mhm.
So like I said, I believe we need the housing action plan to do a lot of the detailed analysis. We could, for the future, look into setting up, if we were going to allow tiny homes, setting up where they would be allowed, what zoning districts would they be allowed in, at what density would they be allowed? Would each unit have to connect to water and sewer, or could they have one master meter and several large step tanks as opposed to each individual having a water and sewer account? There would need to be some very detailed information. So while we can say right now we don't prohibit them, the state's allowing that. Do you want to go into where, what possible zoning code updates would be required to allow a small house or a tiny home, small home village?
Hey, Tammy, this is Floyd.
Hi,
Tiny
Floyd.
homes are considered RVs.
Mhm. They are.
Well, do-
So when you say you want a tiny home, you're saying you want to open an RV park. Frankly, I don't know if I'd want that in the city limits of Yelm. That's just my 2 cents.
do we even have that kind of a need here in Yelm? I know there's some homeless people around, but is it that much of an issue for us right now that we have to address the tiny home question as opposed to defining an affordable housing issue? I'm not sure why we're considering this tiny home problem.
We've been requested by city council to review our zoning code, to review our codes in relation to tiny homes. I'm gonna go back up to the actual request.
So do we prohibit it at all, or that's not addressed?
It's not addressed because it's an RV. So if you're allowed to park an RV in your yard, you can have a tiny home. You're not building a foundation. You're not putting in water, sewer,
Mhm.
or anything else.
Gotcha.
Just like Floyd
Right.
said, it's an RV. You can also bring a trailer if you're allowed within the development. You can have your trailer parked beside your house.
Got it.
Let's paint another
right.
picture on it too. So we're talking about taking taxpayers' money and purchasing personal property, not real property. Therefore, it's going to devalue the moment we put it there.
Well,
So
we wouldn't be
we're-
buying it, Floyd.
We're just asking what the law is of putting one here. I don't
Yeah.
think we're purchasing it.
It
All
would
right.
be a developer.
Disregard.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I'm sorry. It's
It's all right. You just hadn't made the rest of the trip with us.
Like I said, basically what you're saying is just like Floyd said. It's an RV. It's an RV park. Are we doing that? Or are we allowing somebody to park one of those next to their house as an auxiliary dwelling unit? It's a whole different thing. And I'm not sure we want to go there right now.
Well, if the council had asked, what I understood from Tammy is the council had asked us to assess our response to tiny homes and the zoning codes and such. It sounds like what we need to do is to go back to council and say what we need to be able to do this, because they're basically RVs and it's temporary dwellings, is to do this housing assessment. And if the council wants to proceed, they need to help us do that assessment.
You know, we could also do something else. It's say that, you know, right now it doesn't seem to be a very good fit, but I know that Olympia Federal is looking at the possibility of being able to finance tiny homes, but I'm assuming that if they are, they're going to be financing with a foundation, and how, you know, who's making the determination that that is an actual, you know, a title elimination, you know, so, you know, like a manufactured home. So, you know, we don't know where this is going. So I don't know how we can address it right now.
Yeah, and my guess is Olympia Federal is financing like you do when you buy your RV. You can buy an RV and spend 20 years paying it off and pay $200,000 for it, but it's not a home, it's an RV, and they would probably do the same with a tiny home. They would finance it, but it would be still an RV. It'd be on wheels, or it could be put on wheels.
Well, and I want to make sure that we clarify that we do allow RV parks in our C2 and C3 zone. They're a recreational vehicle, they're to be there for less than 30 days. In the city of Yelm, camping is not allowed, while we do have folks who have family visiting or somebody visiting them and they have an RV, you know, maybe in their driveway for a couple of weeks. But it is absolutely temporary, and they're not allowed to be living quarters. The tiny homes, if again, would be allowed if they're constructed to the residential code, but it's very difficult to achieve meeting that code when you're building a tiny home. So I think Anne is spot on, and I appreciate you saying it so much more eloquently than I did. But we need to go back to council and state if we really want to go into depth of what type of zoning changes or regulations or design standards that we would propose to allow this type of housing, then we actually need their help and assistance in moving forward and making sure that we know what our true need is here in town.
Seattle might be doing something like that too. You might look at what they're doing with codes.
So far, everything I've read is any of the tiny homes that you're looking at that do not meet the residential code are emergency or temporary housing. They're not permanent living.
Yeah, I think we just send it back to the city council and say, because we don't have the answer now, and like Floyd said, to put a whole bunch of these little places in here, they'd just be devalue property around it.
Asking council for proceeding with the housing action plan at least gives them a way to determine how serious they are about it.
There you go.
Is that the consensus?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's great, Ann. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's a consensus.
So it is 5:30. I was hoping to quickly go over the rezones that we spoke about in February and March. If you're all okay with moving forward, we can, those are the last two items that I have to go through today.
I'm okay. I just have a meeting that I have to leave the quarter up for.
Go ahead. Ann?
Now, if we can leave by 1/4 of, I can do it.
All right, I will talk fast then. I will talk really fast and move to, I thought I had it pulled up here. I am so sorry.
Is Chris still hanging in there?
He may have gone home.
Oh, okay.
I know I'm here.
Oh, jeez.
He's still there.
Okay,
Nodding,
so-
saying, hi, Chris.
Yes, thank you, Chris. So for the rezone and the commercial rezone, if you remember, we talked about the request for rezone was this 20 acres on Yelm Avenue. I'll try to make it a little bit bigger for y'all here. Sorry about that. This 20 acres between Killian Road and Mountain View Road. And during our discussions and meeting, we had the adjacent property owners come in of these two 10-acre parcels. We had a very long discussion about the possibility of changing these to residential. And I do believe that the Planning Commission was looking favorably towards this, allowing this rezone or approving this rezone. There were a couple questions that we had that were unanswered, and that was, what are the impacts to revenue, tax and taxes, and what were the impacts to our infrastructure? Pardon me. Like I said earlier, Public Works has been looking at this. Our assumption is that our sewer system is going to be fine if this, if these commercial projects were changed to residential development at the R6 and R16 density. But that analysis is going to come in this week to show whether our assumptions are supported. Assuming that they are supported, without a full accounting analysis, I did do some background work and wanted to let you know that we all know that property taxes for commercial property are higher than single family. And it's kind of a substantial difference. It's over $1,000 a year difference in taxes. In the big scheme of things for the city of Yelm, our income is we receive 15% of the property tax revenue that when you pay your property taxes, the city receives 15%. So when we're looking at those numbers, the 10 acres of vacant residential land vacant is $286 a year, where that same 10 acres, if it was zoned commercial, is almost $1,700 a year. The one thing that I found very interesting is if 10 acres of residential land was built with 60 homes, which is the R6 zoning, at an average $500 a year taxes the city receives. Again, this is not what you pay in property taxes, because we all know we pay more than $500 a year. The city only receives $500 of all of those property taxes. And so the tax base for 60 homes is going to be about $30,000 a year. A similar commercial complex in town that has 5 buildings on close to, I think it's a little over 5 acres. Its tax base on the commercial buildings themselves are only $10,000. So the tax base that we receive for residential housing is going to be more. It's the B&O tax that is difficult to describe. And that's going to take into effect that we know e-commerce is big, brick and mortars, you could say is dying, but I don't believe that's so. I believe that there's still a need for both. And so what we, without a full accounting analysis, I can't say what the loss of B&O taxes are, but I would say that if you look at development in town, Walmart is huge. Its B&O tax revenue to the city is large. A comparable size business such as Safeway, it's a large complex, but our B&O tax revenue is a little bit less from them, because most of their sales are food, and that's non-taxable items. So the tax revenue there is probably a little bit less. Then when you go down into the smaller buildings, it's hard to judge, on what their retail sales are and what that income would be. So where I was kind of getting at is that, oh no, the last thing is RC1 zone is not intended for big box. So even if we didn't rezone this and left this commercial, you would never get a Walmart or a Lowe's or a Home Depot on there, just because of our design
Yeah.
standards. And that big box stores and large retail are specifically set aside for our C3 zone. So you're going to get, even with this large amount of commercial land, you're going to get smaller retail complexes, such as you might see down where Starbucks and KFC and AutoZone are. You would have a complex with some smaller buildings. So even our design standards make it so that that wouldn't be a large retail. All said and done, what we might lose in B&O, we're probably going to gain in our tax base, especially getting tax base from residential development as opposed to vacant land. So where this all falls down
And then you
to
would
is,
gain on the B&O as well.
what's that?
With 60 families in there, they're contributing to Walmart and other things, other businesses through town. You're going to gain on B&O as well.
Yes, and and the other standard it's not, I don't know, I don't think it's written anywhere, but what we find in over time is that the commercial follows residential. So you have a large residential growth and then you get some large commercial growth. And then the commercial kind of holds off while the residential catches back up again. So commercial usually follows residential growth. And if, the more housing we get, then the more commercial that will come in. So you're absolutely right. My question is with these findings, do you still feel positively, I'm sorry to move this around. Do you still feel positively about the rezone on these parcels? Do you want to go with all 4? Or did you want to only do these 3? Or there was even discussion of keeping this one commercial and changing these to residential. It's what I was looking for moving forward.
I would go
Um,
for.
who was this?
That was Anne, as I'd go for all 4 going to residential.
Okay. John Graver?
I mean, I certainly would go with all 4. My preference would be to be the 3 on the right. Because that one piece does almost touch 510, but in case of getting better housing, or maybe even get some more affordable housing, I'd go with all 4.
Okay. Carlos?
4.
Carlos? 4? John? Tom?
I'll go all 4.
Okay. Floyd?
All 4.
Okay, and I go all 4, so that's unanimous.
Okay, I will move forward with that recommendation. And the last one is our industrial rezone. And again, at the last meeting, the Planning Commission was favorable of rezoning the properties within the city limits from industrial to residential. The 2 questions were tax base and infrastructure. We already have the assumption that infrastructure is going to be fine, supported by the analysis that'll be coming in this next week. And then the second was the tax base, and the differences between industrial land and residential land are not as great as the commercial difference. And then also the B&O revenue is very much less than retail sales. Generally, it's very small in the big scheme of things. Unless you're a very large complex that does a lot of retail sales, if you were looking at the gravel companies or the cabinet manufacturing, things like that, the Cenex, their overall B&O to the city is very small. In fact, anywhere between 5,000 and 20,000 a year is all. So I think that the tax base changes, the increase in housing tax, property taxes is much outweighs the loss of revenue from industrial B&O.
Who was that? So to take a tally, how does everybody feel relative to rezoning those areas to residential? John Graver?
I'm kind of in favor.
Okay, Ann,
I'm in favor. Yes.
Carlos,
Yes,
John Thompson,
Yes,
Floyd?
Yes,
Okay, and I say, so the same, so it's unanimous.
Okay, well, I gave you 5 minutes now. I think that we're done. I think I have the appropriate direction from you all on all of these changes. It's a lot of work, I know. I appreciate your extra time. I've given you 5 minutes to get through your subcommittee reports if you have nothing further from me.
Okay, and do you have anything for parks?
I don't have anything for parks today. Yeah, no, just the normal things. We're gonna have a lot of events starting up fairly soon. And the water park is gonna open up, which
Okay.
is all news.
John Graver, trees.
I don't know, Chris, do we have anything?
We do not. I know that some of the trees that were removed over on Creek Street were replaced over by the Yelm Creek Apartments. It's been pretty quiet on that front.
Any other subcommittee reports? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn, and thank you for all your hard work today. I think there was a lot of stuff accomplished. Thank you very much, Tammy, and the staff at the Yelm City Hall.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
yes.
So I
A
need
motion
that
to
motion.
adjourn.
Okay,
I move
and
that
you
we
making a motion?
adjourn.
Okay, and it's seconded by Carlos. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye,
Bye.
Motion approved. Thank you. Have a good week.
you too.
See you.
All right, everyone,
in about
thank you so
four
much.
weeks.
Bye.